On the occasion of celebrating the 76th anniversary of diplomatic relations, we have the pleasure of interviewing His Excellency, Mr. Ajit Gupte, Indian Ambassador to Egypt. A very good day, sir, and it's a pleasure to be with you today, a very special day, celebrating, of course, 76 years of relations between India and Egypt.
Yes, and today is also India's 77th Independence Day, because we became independent on 15th of August 1947, and this morning we've had a big celebration at India House.
It's our utmost pleasure, sir. Sir, President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi paid his second state visit to India in January of the year 2023. He was invited as the chief guest of India's 74th Republic Day celebrations. A joint statement highlighting elevation of bilateral relations to strategic partnership was also issued on this occasion. Would you please, sir, explain for us the meaning of strategic partners and the commitments required the two countries to meet such elevation of relations?
Well, it is well known that India and Egypt were two of the greatest ancient civilizations in the world, and we have had contacts which have been maintained and nurtured over the last 4,000 years. We were also co-founders of the non-aligned movement, and there was a very special relationship and friendship between our founding fathers, Jawaharlal Nehru, the first Prime Minister of India, and President Gamal Abdel Nasser. Now, despite the close friendship and cooperation which has continued over the years, we had not yet defined the relationship and given it a special status. So, keeping in mind the historic close ties and also recent developments in relations where there has been a rapid expansion in trade, in defense, in cultural and people-to-people contacts, both leaders decided to elevate the relations to a strategic partnership. Now, obviously, strategic partnership is only done with countries which are with whom there is mutual trust, there is a desire to have friendly relations, and the strategic partnership document lists out various areas where the cooperation is to be strengthened. This is in areas like trade, investment, defense, security, political, cultural and tourism exchanges. So we will be working on deepening our cooperation in these areas.
Okay, sir, Your Excellency mentioning, of course, trade, food security and defense during Prime Minister Narendra Modi's recent visit to Egypt in June 2023. The two countries discussed strengthening ties in areas which you, of course, mentioned, including trade, food security, and defense. How can the two countries boost bilateral relations and expand them to new horizons?
Well, you see, over the last year, the developments in the bilateral relations have truly been historic and have gathered a lot of momentum. Last year, from September onwards, 3 of our very senior and important ministers visited Egypt. Our defense minister came in September 2022, followed by the visit of our external affairs minister in October 2022, and the last visit by our external affairs minister was in 2015, so there was a big gap. And then our environment minister came to Sharm el-Sheikh for COP 27, and this was followed by the very important epoch-making visit of President Sisi to India in January 2023. Now, let me just briefly tell you that there is a revival of the relationship which was affected by the COVID pandemic, because we could not have physical visits for about 2 years due to the COVID pandemic. But over the last year, we have really provided new vitality and momentum, and our trade last year expanded by 75%. It reached a record high of 7.26 billion, and I am happy to tell you that the trade was reasonably balanced. In fact, India emerged as the 3rd largest export destination for Egypt. Similarly, there's a lot of Indian investments which are coming into Egypt. Our defense and security cooperation has expanded, and many of the bilateral mechanisms which were there but perhaps they had not met, they have been revived and they have met.
Okay, Your Excellency, India and Egypt share close political understanding based on long history of contacts and cooperation in bilateral, regional and global issues. To what extent are Egypt and India at consensus towards international and regional main issues?
Well, as I mentioned earlier, India, Egypt and Yugoslavia had co-founded the non-aligned movement in 1961, and there was a lot of exchange of visits at that time. The non-aligned movement provided an inspiring alternative model to developing countries which had become recently independent in Africa and Asia, and to encourage them to not necessarily side with one of the superpowers but remain independent. And this has had a long lasting impact. Now, despite the ups and downs in international relations, India and Egypt are two countries which have maintained an independent position. Both have had to face many challenges, but even today we find that both countries are independent minded. Today the world is facing many multiple crises. Just as we were recovering from the COVID pandemic, you have the conflict in Ukraine. The conflict has already polarized the world between the north and the south, between the west and the east, and it has created a lot of inflationary pressure which is being felt across the world because of Ukraine and Russia were exporting a lot of wheat. There is a disruption in the fuel fertilizer supply. So there is a lot of disruption, and it is hitting the developing countries particularly hard.
Okay, how do you see the future of Egyptian-Indian bilateral relations in light of the recent years' momentum, which you mentioned a few now?
Well, we are going through a truly remarkable phase, because it is unprecedented that within a span of 6 months we've had 2 state visits. President Sisi's visit in January 2023, followed quickly by our Prime Minister's visit, and both were classified, they were given the designation of state visit, which is special in diplomatic relations. And incidentally, our Prime Minister's visit was taking place after a period of 26 years to Egypt. Of course, our Prime Minister had come in 2009 for the non-aligned movement summit, but a bilateral visit was taking place after a long time. There is a very good personal relationship between President Sisi and Prime Minister. This time we also had a round table between our Prime Minister with the Egyptian Prime Minister and the cabinet ministers. Now we are working on opening new areas of cooperation with Egypt. I have been discussing this with your government, and I hope we will be able to announce a number of new ideas, a number of new projects. The Indian companies are also investing quite a lot in Egypt. In fact, over the last year, we had 3 companies which are leading players in renewable energy who have signed MOUs with a total promised investment of $18 billion. And they plan to develop green hydrogen in Egypt. And I hope that these investments come through, because it will add a new dimension to our relationship.
Of course, we all hope that this happens. Egypt has traditionally been one of India's most important trading partners in the African continent. And according to the Egyptian Central Agency for Public Mobilization Statistics, India was the 6th most important trading partner for Egypt in FY 2021-2022. How do you assess Egyptian-Indian level of trade?
Well, you rightly said that Egypt and India have a very strong bilateral trade relationship. For India, Egypt is the 3rd largest trade partner. The bilateral trade last year increased by 75% to reach a record high of 7.26 billion. What I find interesting is that there is a good complementarity between the trade. So Egypt exports certain items to India, like crude oil, which is refined in India and sent back, natural gas, which India needs for its industry, but also important items like fertilizer, which our farmers need, and also some things which have become more important, like raw cotton, which is sent back from India, and recently citrus fruits. So there are a lot of oranges and citrus fruits from Egypt. Now from India, the trade is complementary. One of the most important items is crude oil, which is refined and sent, but we are also the large exporter of buffalo meat. Buffalo meat, food grains like rice, we are the largest supplier of rice to Egypt, and a lot of engineering goods. Now, I do think that there is potential to expand the trade further and enter new areas.
Your Excellency, is Egyptian-Indian rate of trade exchange up to the expectation?
Well, as I said, we had a very sharp increase last year when it grew by 75%. I think we will need to diversify the trade basket. When we had the meeting of the Joint Trade Committee last year in July, the leaders set a target of increasing the bilateral trade to $12 billion by 2027. I think this is very much achievable, and I will mention some of the areas. We are already a very large exporter of engineering goods and also cars, vehicles, the three-wheelers, motorcycles to Egypt. Now, what has happened is because of the devaluation that Egypt has had to undergo, I think Egypt needs to look at alternative sources because the items which say perhaps were made in the US or the EU will now be very, very expensive. In any case, most of these items are made by companies in India, not just very good Indian companies, but also international companies which are manufacturing in India. So I would encourage Egyptian businessmen and chambers of commerce to look at sourcing more of the engineering goods, electrical goods, even the consumer items, clothes, ready-made clothes, leather items from India. The products made in India by good companies are very reliable, they are long-lasting, of excellent quality. And similarly, as Egypt develops, say, its renewable energy over the next few years, we are a leading producer of wind turbines, blades, solar panels. So I think Egypt should look at acquiring more items from India, and this will also encourage Indian companies to invest and manufacture. It should also attract more investment from Indian companies. We are one of the largest investors. We've invested about $3.3 billion, and Indian companies contribute extensively to exports from Egypt. Because Egypt is a member of about 8 FTAs, if it can attract Indian companies to manufacture here, be able to export from developed markets such as EU, US, and even neighboring markets like the Gulf and Africa. I think from Egypt's viewpoint, there are some products which I would like to highlight. I mentioned that the citrus fruit exports have gone up, but I think there is a lot of demand for items like dates, which we don't grow in India, and Egypt grows a lot of dates, and also items like olives and olive oil, which we also don't grow.
So, sir, do you think that, in your opinion, the most attractive investment fields for the Indian investors in Egypt, what from your own perspective are the most important in light of that around 50 Indian companies have invested in various sectors in Egypt, with a combined investment that you just mentioned of $3.3 billion US dollars. Do you think that Egypt has more attractive areas for the Indian investors?
Yes. So look, the Indian companies have invested in Egypt in certain sectors. The largest investor is TCI Sanmar, which has invested $1.5 billion to manufacture PVC and caustic soda. But we have other investments in areas like packaging, plastic packaging, films, a company which is making granules for the plastic bottles, a very large company called Indorama, and they are considering additional investments. And then we have a whole range of companies in paints, food products like Monjini's, hair care products like Dabur, etc. So I know that the Suez Canal Economic Zone chairman has been to India recently to attract more investments. Indian companies are looking at Egypt, but more promotion is required. And some of the areas I think where Indian companies could be interested is engineering products, pharmaceuticals and health products, and also in the future electric vehicles.
That's amazing. On the other hand, Egyptian investments in India are to the tune of 37 million US dollars. How do you think can India attract more Egyptian investment?
I think some of the areas where Egypt can benefit are areas like startups and fintech, and also IT. And here I think it is more a question of collaboration and cooperation, because India also has a flourishing startup sector. We have made a lot of advances in fintech and digital transformation. So these are areas, actually, as we speak, a group of 5 Egyptian startups are going to India next week, Bangalore, to take part in the Digital Innovation Alliance, and I'm sure they will come back with many ideas, because there is a revolution taking place in India in terms of digital transformation.
The 18th Heads of State and Government Summit of the Group of 20, G20, will take place in September of 2023 in New Delhi in India. What is India's agenda for this forthcoming summit?
Well, India has held the presidency from the 1st of December last year, and in addition to the G20 countries, we decided to invite 9 countries as guest countries, and this is one of the largest ever set of invitations which have been sent by the host country. So Egypt was included as an invitee for the guest country, and I am very happy to tell you that Egypt has participated in the G20 meetings with a lot of enthusiasm. I understand that the quality of the participation by Egypt is very high, and a lot of useful inputs have been given by the Egyptian delegates. Now, the G20 is a powerful grouping of the 20 most advanced industrial countries. They account for 65–70% of the global GDP. What we have tried during our presidency is that the G20 should not only discuss the issues related to them, but that they should take a much more wider view, and our efforts have been particularly to highlight the problems and grievances faced by the developing countries. We had convened a few months ago a summit, the Voice of Global South, where the ministers of various developing countries were asked to speak, and the Egyptian foreign minister spoke. So the main issues which India is trying to get the world and the G20 to focus on are issues which are very relevant for the global south, as we call it, the developing countries. And these are issues like food insecurity. You are aware of how much inflation there is in Egypt and other countries after the Ukraine war. The fuel crisis, because there is a disruption in the fuel supplies, the fertilizer crisis which many countries are facing, because a lot of the fertilizers were being made in Russia and Ukraine. We are also trying to encourage cooperation among developing countries and between the north and the south in countering climate change and developing disaster resilient infrastructure.
Sir, these topics you just mentioned are the role of India, which India participated or used as the presidency to tackle these key international issues, what you just mentioned?
Yes. So, India's effort as the president of the G20 is to act as a bridge, between the larger, the developed countries and the industrialized countries and the global south, and to bring on the agenda issues which the whole world faces. And we feel that the G20 should provide some direction, it should provide some solutions.
Collaboration and help.
Yes. Now today you see, because of the Ukraine conflict and international developments in international relations, there is a very sharp polarization in the world, and we are trying to get people, all the countries together.
Point of views together.
Yes, even though there are differences, and to try and contribute. Now, for instance, renewable energy, we have set up a few years ago the International Solar Alliance. We are encouraging countries to become members of the Solar Alliance, because solar energy is the easiest to roll out, and it can help to mitigate the challenge from the carbon dioxide emissions. Egypt is a country which can develop solar energy very quickly and reduce its carbon footprint. So India itself has achieved a lot. We are the fourth largest. We have the fourth largest capacity in renewable energy. with a total capacity of 175 gigawatts, and we have set a target of 500 gigawatts by 2030. So there are a lot of, we would like to share our experience, our successes with the developing countries. We have also achieved a great deal in digital transformation. We have been able to open about 450 million bank accounts for the poor people in India over 2-3 years. We have a biometric ID card, and we are able to give subsidies directly to the beneficiaries into their bank account. All the government schemes now are linked to this biometric system, so that there is no pilferage. There is a huge transformation in terms of access to the internet, and we have really developed the digital physical infrastructure in India. If you go there, you will see that every shop offers 4 or 5 ways of payment through Paytm, Google Pay, Phone Pay. So even the poorest of Indians are now using their phone to make payments through a digital manner. And because we have broadband, they are able to see what is happening not only in India but the rest of the world. So some of the experiences in India have been transformational. We've achieved this in a few years, and we would like to share this expertise particularly with the developing countries.
We have to mention here that India holds the presidency of the G20 from the 1st of December 2022 to 30th of November 2023. Under the Indian presidency, the G20 in 2023 will focus on the theme, One Earth, One Family, One Future. How would Egypt be involved in these themes?
You see, let me tell you a bit of background of this. So as you know, India is an ancient civilization going back thousands of years, and one of our very popular themes in India is Vasudev Kutumbakam, which basically means that the whole world is one, and the world is one family. And that is why our Prime Minister chose this theme for the G20, and it is very appropriate because G20 presidency is being held at a time when the world, there is increasing friction, there is conflict in different parts of the world. But what our leadership is trying to tell everybody is, look, you know, we have to face the common problems, and we have to find the solutions together. There is such a big problem from climate change. You know, there are floods everywhere when floods did not take place. There are heat waves, the Arctic is melting. So the countries need to act together. You cannot have 10 countries developing renewable energy in Scandinavia and Africa not developing renewable energy. You need to have a common problem. So a common approach. So our focus, as I said, is to try and mobilize public opinion, not just of the G20 countries but also the developing countries. And that is why we have invited Egypt, because Egypt is not only the most populous Arab country in the world, but it is a bridge between Africa and the Arab world. It carries a lot of weight, it has a lot of influence in the region, and when Egypt takes a certain view, then it encourages the countries in the region to also adopt a similar approach. So we do hope and we are confident that Egypt's participation in the G20 together with India will help marshal and convince global opinion that the countries of the north and the south, the east and the west must work together, not to focus on their differences but on their commonalities and overcome the challenges facing the world.
Your Excellency, Mr. Ajit Gupte, Indian Ambassador to Egypt, of course, we thank you so much for this informative interview and for giving us the opportunity on this very special day, celebrating, of course, the 76th anniversary of diplomatic relations between Egypt and India, and also celebrating a very special Indian celebration, which is the Independence Day. Independence Day. And Independence Day, yes, sir. We thank you very much.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be with you.
Thank you.